What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben, and welcome back to the bench, guys, for another episode of our Recon group build and our F9F-8P Photo Cougar. Today we are pushing forward, and I'm really hoping to be able to get this into more or less a shape of a cougar. I'm going to work on the cockpit insert, the tail insert, and then the wings, see how we can do with that. Now, last episode, I went ahead and finished off most of the cockpit. I like how it looks so far. I added in the front windscreen coping, and I actually had to lower this viewfinder just by cutting an opening, drop this viewfinder right down onto the instrument panel. Otherwise, it just sat too high and it didn't look natural. It looked odd. I also went ahead and scratch built some details, as you can see on the back of the seat right here. I'm not sure what this does in real life, but this is basically an object that this hose plugs into, and I tried making it the best I could from my references. It may not be 100% correct, may need to add in a few extra wires and whatnot here, but I do have this piston, which I'm assuming is the actuator for the canopy, but other than that, I think the cockpit is more or less done. So you can see I've got my oxygen hose that I put in there, and it looks okay. Honestly, looks fine. Also have my splitter plates installed, so I think it's pretty much ready for installation. Put that aside. Now, the center section of the fuselage, that's where we're really having some trouble because there's just not really a lot of support for the inner edges of these inserts. Let me show you what I mean. If you push down on the very inner edge, as you can see, it actually pops open my seam, and it's really flexy. And that's not the greatest of things to have happen because these inserts, for example here, the front cockpit insert, that has to actually drop these tabs down into these openings. And in order to get those in, we have to kind of press pretty harshly down on top of this to go ahead and pop those in. As you can see, the minute I do that, it starts ripping up my seams. So that's not great. Now, of course, what we could do is come in here and we might be able to add some supports for the inner edge so that when I press down on that, it actually does not compress. I think that would be a really good position to take, and I'll probably use some excess sprue and just see what I can do with that. Now, the tail, that is another issue that we have, and we've actually only glued part of it. As you can see, the front end is actually still unglued. I did that on purpose because I'm not sure how this will all kind of fit together. When we go ahead and try to drop this down on top of the middle section of the fuselage, you can see that any sort of pressure now opened up the seam even more, so that's not the greatest. And we have a gap right there by the rear of the tail where the tail meets the wing, and that's not going to really fly. We flip that around to the other side, and again, we can get everything more or less to fit in, but we still have a gap at the very back end of that tail. Then we go ahead and add in the front cockpit insert, something like this. We may have a seam right here where the front meets the back. So lots to do, guys. It's going to be complicated and probably requiring a lot of glue, but we'll see what we can do. Now, moving on to the supports, I think what I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to form some basic little pillars out of excess sprue. Just going to go ahead and cut little pieces that are going to be angled and are going to be about the right size. Then we're going to glue them on the inside right along the inner edge. And I think what that will do is it will allow us to then be able to press down on that and not flex that whole area. I'll do that on both sides. Just add one on the back, one on the front. That should be sufficient. Then we can go ahead and start gluing down the different parts. I also want to go ahead and tackle the wings. I had mentioned last episode that we had 2 additional pylon openings, and as far as I can tell, that's not really something that you see a lot on Photo Cougars. So I'm going to go ahead and block those off, and the way to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and create some plastic plugs just from some stretched sprue. I'll just heat that up, pull it apart just a little bit so that it just kind of tapers into the center, and then I'll be able to cut that in half, and I'll have 2 plugs for 1 piece of sprue. That should be decent enough. So let's go ahead and jump into our first time lapse. I want to get those supports all nicely placed. I want to get the wing plugs in, glued down. I want to shim up some fuselage because I know we're going to have gaps. Get that tail and intake sections all glued together, then install the cockpit insert. So let's get on to that first time lapse, see what we can do. Let's do it. Alright everybody, we are back, and as you can see, we have the Cougar more or less kind of all glued together. I gotta tell you, that was not easy. No matter what I did, I have gaps along different areas where the wing meets the fuselage, and also the splitter plates, and the top of the intakes didn't line up correctly. So what I ended up doing is I took this clamp and I actually put pressure there on the front intakes, and I was able to kind of splay them apart a little bit more and then glue them down. A little bit of extra thin Tamiya, bond all the plastic together, and then I'm taking a little bit of super glue and just kind of shoring up the different seams with that. I think that's going to work. So once that's kind of all dried and ready to go, we can take our jeweler files and some sandpaper, go over all the seams, make sure that everything is nicely filled out. I also need to go ahead and come in with a little bit of Mr. Surfacer, probably use 500, and go ahead and just trace a line of that all along this joint. Now I did end up taking some small strips of styrene and just wedging them in between the different areas. And that actually ended up working to fill up kind of the larger, more cavernous gaps. For example, on the undersurface of the aircraft where the fuselage meets that cockpit insert, there is a huge step there and a giant seam. I had to put like 3 pieces of styrene together just to go ahead and take up that room. And that actually happens right there at the air brakes. So I need to go ahead and next episode install the air brakes. So I want to go ahead and tuck them in and fold them up. But we might have to come in with some sanding files and some sandpaper and whatnot and just kind of start tapering down that entire area together once I have the air brakes glued into place. Honestly, I'd rather have a gap in a step on the bottom of the aircraft than on the top of the aircraft where you can blatantly see it. Again, a little bit of super glue should help to tack everything together, and hopefully that holds the entire seam so we don't have to worry about it popping open during the middle of our next episode. Also did a little bit of work on the undersides of the wings. As you saw from the time lapse, I created a couple of plugs that I could just fit right down into those openings for the extra pylons. So I've sanded those down and they look pretty decent, so I'm happy about that. The wings were actually far easier to put together than the fuselage. For some reason, the fuselage just gave me so much hassle, and I'm still not out of the woods because I know I'm going to have to sand down and fill up seams. It's just going to be really, really troublesome. But I think we're going to go ahead and call it quits for this episode. We've done plenty of damage today. Let's go ahead and just put everything aside and let everything cure. I've got the wings all set up. I've got the fuselage ready to go. The wing, I do have to do a little bit more work on the undersurface to make sure that those locating pins and those plugs don't really show through. The Cougar is a challenge, yes, but I'm having fun building it, so hopefully we can get this thing all wrapped up. But until then, you know the drill. Go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool, and we'll see you back here on episode number 5 for the 1/48 scale F9F-8P Photo Cougar. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you soon.